Hello and welcome back to Magic in the Noise. Today we have some very exciting data to share with you. And we're a bit of a smaller group today. We might still have some people join us, but yeah, so we will be interpreting people's work who aren't able to make it. So we'll do our best to represent them properly. And so if the viewers here with me today want to introduce themselves, that would be wonderful. Cody, I'll let you start.
Hi, I'm Cody. I'm a remote viewer from Australia.
Nice.
I'm Chris, more known as Chileo online. I'm a remote viewer from Belgium, and I have a website, myrvtoolbox.com, and I have a YouTube channel if you want to check some of my sessions out. It's Chileo RV.
Nice. And Claudia?
I'm Claudia. I'm doing RV for 2 years now. I live in the Netherlands, and I learned RV through a CRV way, and currently I'm now having training by Sasha in her full spectrum illumination.
Thank you. And Jeff?
So Jeff, live in the Chicagoland area and like practicing RV, sort of, I view it almost as an energy outlet so that things don't get stuck inside of me. So
nice. That's as good a reason as any. And I am Sasha. I am the co-founder with David of Magic in the Noise. And we are doing these monthly live streams, partly just to participate in the community and to provide regular targets that are safe, that are fun, and to give a bit of light analysis for people's remote viewing work. And so if anyone in the audience wants to participate in next month's live stream, just keep an eye on our social media, and we'll be posting the new target probably in a week for the October live stream. And so thank you everyone for being here today. And I'm going to jump into my presentation. So today we're covering we're covering two topics today. Utsuro-bune, which is a UFO encounter in Japan. It's kind of Japan's Roswell. And then after that, we're going to cover a target that I assign on the divine light of the sefirot, which is the Ein Sof. And part of that session ended up getting into the Ganzfeld flicker and how does that work for better remote viewing. So basically we have two targets that we're going to cover today. And so if you're interested in the divine light only, then skip, I guess, if you're watching the replay to halfway through the video. And we're going to start with the ancient, perhaps USO in Japan. And so the data from the viewers suggested multiple theories. And I think this is a mark of good remote viewers when they don't just provide the data that they believe is the correct data or that they believe is the right theory or is the most popular trending theory. I think a mark of a great remote viewer is when they can provide information about alternative theories that exist about a topic. And hopefully they're able to give you a sense of this one is maybe more myth. This one feels fictional. Feels like there's movie scenes, or feels like a television show. I feel like there are props, and this one feels maybe more authentic. That kind of information can really help, and that's one of the things that we don't really talk about much in the remote viewing community, because I think not everyone has the ability to sense or taste or hear or see the mythical components of a target or of data that comes through. And so when you have viewers who can do that, it's always very good to have those on your team because they can help parse out the truth of an event. And so in this case, the utsuro-bune, Japan's Roswell, the theories are, some people say it's a UFO that crash landed into the ocean near Japan. Some people think it's a USO, a submergible, that came up from the ocean floor. There are theories that it's a Phoenician princess that was escaping some war, maybe a Russian aristocrat. There's data in the sessions today that we'll be sharing that suggests it might have been a bride-to-be that was made a victim of the war between Russia and China, maybe between UFOs and the Qing Dynasty Emperor, or between reptilians and the Chinese, and the humans of the old world. And then finally, we have data that supports a new theory that I haven't seen anywhere in the literature, but I'm quite convinced that it might be the true story, which is an Ainu girl. The Ainu are a tribe that lived in northern Japan, and they're ethnically quite distinct, that was traded to keep the peace with Chinese overlords, that somehow got waylaid. Either she escaped, or she didn't make it, or she ran away. Not too clear what happened, but we'll show you the data and people can make up their own minds. And we also have some data talking about where this craft might be now. And so here's a little bit of information about this incident. Basically, it was this huge craft that was very different from everything that the fishermen were used to on the coast of Japan. And it washed ashore in 1803. And there are a lot of different historical sources that talk about it. And they're pretty consistent in the stories that they tell. They tell of this hollow boat that shows up, and it has a rounded top, and it has this kind of triangular panels on the bottom, that it has a metal bottom and this rosewood top, that there's weird markings on it. Inside, they find a young woman wearing very distinct and different clothing that they're used to. She has red hair. She's very, very different from the people in the villages where she landed. And so right now, it's trendy to think of it as a UFO story. So we're going to just look at all the data that came in. And so Chris is in the light pale purple. Claudia's data is bordered in pink. Cody in teal. Jeff in this kind of cream color. John in red. Michael in silvery blue. Patrick, Dutch Patrick in dark purple, and Irish Patrick in green. A few people are missing today. They couldn't make it because I switched it from a Sunday to a Saturday. But we'll carry on and represent their data as well as we can. And so here we had Chris seeing that it's a topic for decades, if not centuries, and that was really good data for an event like this, something so historical that we're still talking about centuries later. And John had this idea of Aesop's tales or fables, that something about this made him feel disrespectful. He has this idea of it's agitating him, pushing him outside of his reality box. And so that was really interesting, that idea of leaving his comfort zone. And Jeff, you had the data point at this point, is it an ancient story or was it real? So again, bringing up that idea of this might be fictional. And Patrick had this idea of history that was distorted temporarily. And Chris, you had UFO disclosure, hidden, not fully honest. So here we see all the viewers are bringing back this sensation of maybe part of this is real, but maybe part of it is just the myth. And so that was useful data. Chris, you did something so fun here. You actually drew the image as it's presented in the paintings and the scrolls. And so I just wanted you to say a few words about this and what you thought when you saw the feedback.
I actually didn't flash on that, but now that I see it, it's pretty cool. So yeah, when I was doing the session here, I really had an idea of a painting or looking through a window with some shapes that was like that.
Nice.
So here, yeah, it really looks similar. That's pretty nice.
Yeah, I think it's such a cool sketch. And I like that you picked up on the aspect of the painting. So did Michael. He also had that idea of a medieval art or painting. And Cody, you had the sense of a statue coming through in some of your work, and we're going to show that a little bit later. But I think it applies here as well, this idea of this artistic expression. I thought that was good. And then Dutch Patrick drew, it's very pale, it's hard to see, but it looks like the craft inverted. So he kind of has the round ring along the bottom, and the kind of triangular cones along the top. So I thought that was very interesting. And he also has that there's rays like downward movement. And a few people picked up on that idea of a craft that's falling downward. So that was really nice data. And then here, John had a timeline for us that was really helpful. So he has this idea of there's this plea for an agreement, there's a pause, and then there's the release of a trigger or a button, some kind of large descending energetic object moving downwards towards the coastal cities. This is a perfect description of the actual event of this large mass, and it's what Patrick was describing in the last slide. And the idea of warnings given, I just thought that was really interesting. And Claudia, you also had that this was found long ago. You had that idea of 1800, and that's a perfect date. So I thought that was really good data. And then here we can see, so John saw these two factions that were coming together, that there's this peace deal to be brokered of some kind, an agreement that has to be made, that the two groups have to team up somehow. And he identifies them as the snake and the eagle. And I'll kind of dig into this a little bit later, but I thought that was really good data, interesting. And Claudia, you also had that idea of like a successful teamwork, so that corroborated John's data. And Chris, you had this idea of evolving towards something more sustainable, happier people. And so I think that kind of matches better future, this agreement that gets made. And one of the things you had as well, both John and you, Chris, had this idea of the tide turning, a sudden change in the decision that was maybe unexpected. And so I thought that was interesting to see. Here we see a little bit, there'll be more data in this later, but there's a little bit of data here where John is talking about this rescue, the joint effort to secure a subject on an isolated area off a coastal area, maybe off an island, and he gets a sense of something fictional or mythological. But there's definitely something here, though. So again, it's that idea, like there is an event that happened, but now we've built up all this lore around it. So we're trying to figure out what's the truth. And so I thought you guys did really well there. And then here, yeah, Claudia, so you had jealousy, pity, a struggle between colleagues, that idea of this conflict that has to be resolved. And Chris, I thought your data here as well and pertains to this as well. This idea of this person being the front man, or in this case, maybe the front woman, the face of this event, and that there are going to be debates and arguing for years, which is exactly what's happened about this incident. What's the truth? What really happened? And this idea that there is going to be a change in paradigm, that there has to be a great intellectual war. I just thought that was really good data, really complex conceptual data that was interesting. And so here I wanted to talk about this. This is so weird and interesting because as I'm going through your sessions, I'm doing analysis, I'm kind of trying to figure out what is it that you're trying to communicate. And here, you know, I went through John Dixon's session. He has this tower, this kind of balance with these two pieces of metal sticking out. I was thinking, okay, this is interesting. I'm not sure how to corroborate this or what to make of it in terms of the analysis. And he has that idea of Alexandria's lighthouse, this kind of huge scale, and this capsule falling from the sky towards it. And then, Chris, when I saw your session, you have the same underlying data, the same motif, and you have it as an electric tower, whereas he has it as a lighthouse, and the idea of communicating, broadcasting. And so I don't know if you want to say a few words before I reveal what my analysis suggests that it is, but I thought just the similarities were really interesting.
Yeah, the similarity is very, very intriguing. And I have to say, I'm very ashamed of my sketch next to John's sketch. But hey, that's how it is. He's a good artist, I'm not. But yeah, the similarity is pretty crazy. I mean, it's not a normal shape that you would draw in every section.
No. And also that you had the two things sticking out of the central tower, just like he does. And then where he has a capsule falling in the sky, you have this shape that resembles the craft a little bit. And so I thought, oh, that's even more intriguing. And Patrick, Dutch Patrick is really pale. It's hard to see, but he also has this idea of these people coming together in some kind of a city, which mirrors John's data a little bit. And so I thought that was interesting. But when I started to do the research to figure out what is this data, how does this relate to the target, it was fascinating what I found. So Jeff, no, the unusual tech, that was Patrick, Irish Patrick, had this sense of unusual technology relating to some of these things. And Jeff, you had the sections of the cross and the world traveler seeing the world. The sections of the cross made me think of the globe with the cross on top that we see mostly by, we see it in the Vatican, we see bishops holding it, we see a lot of art depicting it. So I started looking into that, and it brought me somehow synchronicity in the data stream and my own little way of doing analysis. It brought me to this thing called the Liahona. And it's in the Book of Mormon where they talk about a brass ball that has 2 spindles in it. And it directs Lehi and his companions when they leave Jerusalem. They travel across an ocean and they discover the New World, and they settle there. And so it's the device itself is described as something like a compass. And there are texts in the Book of Mormon that talk about it being interpreted as a compass. And I thought that that actually kind of matches this idea of these 2 spindles that have to do with a location and with finding a location. And then there was just a lot of data that I found kind of corroborated the Book of Mormon and this device, this weird device that they have that seems to be used in navigation. I do have as well, for Jeff and Claudia both talked about traveling the world, going far away, taking the opportunities to spread, Claudia, you call it his word. So to me, there was a little bit of, there were hints here and there in the data that suggested this interpretation could be correct. And more so when I kept going through the sessions and I found, so Jeff, you have this ball being held in both hands, but the imagery is very similar to the Liahona. And Chris, you have the hands holding the heart. Again, very similar to Jeff's, but also reminiscent of the Liahona. And John had this top view of this thing that's circular. Here's the side view. And it also fits exceptionally well. And he has this idea of like Mercury-like flow in it. So again, this idea of unusual technology from the past that might be related to navigation. And I also thought, I think this is an interesting thread. And so there are different versions of the story, but like I said, they all kind of cover the same points. But here's one where the upper part had windows made of glass or crystal, and there's tree resin on it, that the shape of the hollow boat resembled a wooden rice pit, that there were just weird items in it as well. She had bed sheets, she had water, some cakes, some kneaded meat, so kind of just security supplies. And so here we just see a lot of corroboration that, Cody, you had this person going down into a pipe or a tight space, a tunnel, and John is talking about this semi-cylindrical space, and everyone's kind of drawing these very similar circular shapes. And Jeff, you have the idea of segregation or segmentation or man-made wooden stalls. And I just thought that that was actually really good corroborating data. Here's more. John has a circular thing in the water. There's a lot going on here. And he has some GSP or GPS coordinates and this capsule-like thing. I'm not sure if it's a boat or an aircraft. And then Cody, you also have this dark hollow, kind of feels restraining. The small area is man-made. And Patrick is also talking about this round shape that has motion, that it has a segmented, rounded wall. And that's exactly what we see in the depictions of the craft. And so here, now Michael had the word helicopter and these whirling pipes that look like a fan, but in connection to the word helicopter. And so Jeff, I know that this came through more as like the clock hands, but I actually saw the underlying data as more related to this idea of a flying craft. And Cody drew it here as well, this idea of this helicopter-like flying craft that's descending. And I think he did a really good job of the shape of matching it to the actual art or the actual craft itself. Chris as well, you have the bowl shape at the top and the ridge around the center. And Cody feels like the top turns around. So again, you're picking up on that helicopter element. Jeff, you have this idea of falling. So if anyone wants to say anything about the data here, or how it came through for them, I'd be interested.
On my side, the shape was something space related.
Yeah.
So I put in my data that it was a metallic rounded shape, something that looks like a capsule. It's related to space or travel, and it's technological.
And I think that matches really well with the other people's data and the helicopter data. Yeah, and the sense of falling. So here we see more. There's also a lot of people picking up on this idea of blinking lights, radio waves, lights coming through, lightning, communication, beaming. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. And I put Michael's gossamer wings here, just this idea of something flying, maybe a bug that has like a shining light on it as well. And Chris, you had this something rotating, some kind of launch floating. So again, a lot of very similar data here, invisible and tangible patterns. And Cody, you had the word satellite. So that was really good to see as well. Yeah, that was really cool. And then here we have, again, people, electromagnetic energy, artificial sun. So that was Dutch Patrick who says it reminds him of China and the artificial sun. And so I thought that was amazing data. Irish Patrick talks about light coming through from the inside. And here there's energy kind of coming out as well. What is this? It's moving. Jeff, again, you have these falling triangles, ball lightning. So people are picking up on some kind of a craft that's moving, that's going downwards, that's different, and seems to have lights on it. Here again, corroboration that was really cool to see. Jeff, you have this battle of the gods and you have these segments. And if you look, if you're standing underneath this craft flying in the sky, this is exactly what you'd see. And I think it's interesting how you saw it breaking apart, because so did Irish Patrick. He kept seeing these different parts that were apart, that had been torn apart or broken apart, that there was energy in between them. And Cody, you also saw these vertical rectangular columns or pillars scattered around a circular structure. And I was thinking, if this thing crash lands at some point, or if it sinks, if it's destroyed, and it's sitting on the ocean floor and it starts falling apart, I would expect to see something like that, actually. So I thought that was really good data. Because we have Irish Patrick talking about shards and seeing this broken up and everything breaking apart. And this is Chris's data that mirrored Jeff's really well, really nice corroboration here, because you also have these double inverted pyramid shapes with an oscillation going on in between, and kind of these opposing forces making a synergy. So again, you're kind of paralleling the data. So everyone seems to be seeing a craft, and it's together and it's flying, and then it starts breaking apart. And Jeff, I thought this flower image matched really well here as well. Here's more of the same, just with some extra data. So Michael had this idea of paper airplane, but the pieces are metal. And so again, that's just fantastic for the metal base of the ship. And here's Patrick talking about the energy between these things and this bright red light. A lot of people picked up on a bright red light associated with this craft. So I thought that was really interesting. Chris, you mentioned a change in understanding, something linked with the universe. I think if this was a flying craft in the 1800s in Japan, that would be quite a big change in our understanding of technology. You also had this idea of a propulsion vehicle, bending space-time related. I thought that was super intriguing. So very interesting data there. Yeah. If you want to say anything.
No, I'm amazed at my own data.
It's so amazing to see the corroborations and to see the patterns, definitely. And here's more. So here we see Michael starts talking about boats, and he's picking up on this boat, and it's kind of a rounded drop-like shape. and this hexagonal enclosure with light in the center and these metallic walls. That's a perfect description. And Claudia, you have this high structure at sea, and you have the ocean, the salty water, taste and smell. So I thought that was really good. And you also had this whale by this castle under the water. And Patrick, Dutch Patrick, also picked up on this idea of a boat that was sitting on the water. Jeff as well. So Jeff, you had this damp basement, standing water. So it's this idea of wetness, and you're in this enclosed dark space. So I thought that was a good match, actually, for the data. And then here, Jeff, you have, it's so interesting how the data comes through, because you have this structure and you have the dark red siding, and the upper part was made of rosewood that was lacquered red. And so it would have been dark red siding. And you have this, this section in the middle, the second floor deck, representing that midpoint ridge. And then the basement where the person is kept. And so even though you have it as a house, you can really see that this is matching the craft. So I thought that was really fun. And a lot of people picked up on the reddish kind of color coming through, red light, red color. So that was nice. And Jeff, did you want to say something about that?
Well, just not about that, but the whole session overall. Okay, there you're showing one of my pictures, yeah. But most of my sessions are usually pictures. This was predominantly words, and just looking at the other data that you're presenting, it seems like other people might have had that same sort of leaning, like more words as opposed to other things.
Yeah, what do you guys think?
I did. I cannot really say much words per se, but like I told Sasha, there was something different with that session, and I had the impression that I was writing all the time, like in the flow continuous, never probing anything. It was just coming in, coming in, coming in. So in that sense, I had much more words than usual.
I'm not sure how to interpret it, but it was definitely something different.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I think that the level of corroboration between everyone's data was higher than I've seen in your other work. There was definitely a lot more mirroring of data. Yeah, I would agree. So here, Jeff, you have you're picking up on this grid pattern that as an entrance, reflection from the window. And we saw earlier where Chris had this view through the window. Behind it looks like it's behind a veil. Looking through a window, watching, the idea of surveillance. And Cody, you have this feels hidden, or an exploration of something. So I thought it was kind of interesting that you're all picking up on the sense of the window, and that was a main point of interest on the craft. And then here, I thought this was really interesting. Michael had aliens, green men, but in that way of saying green men, I feel like it gives it a bit of a fictional tinge to it. And Jeff, you had data that I would associate with Roswell, the tinfoil from Roswell that they could fold up and it would unfold itself properly. And so that's what it made me think of when I saw that in your session. And because this incident is kind of colloquially known as Japan's Roswell, I thought that was an interesting way for the data to come through. And Cody had this capsule and this psychodynamic kind of feel to it, this distraught person inside. And so again, I just think it's really interesting. I put a clip here about the tinfoil at Roswell because I thought that was interesting. And then here, okay, so on the inscriptions that were on the craft, these are the symbols that are mostly replicated from the original artworks that were done. And so I thought it was interesting that people started picking up on this idea of code. And Jeff, you have this, like, you're trying to work through, what is it? What's going on? What is this code? And so I liked seeing that in your work, that you're trying to figure out what the data is trying to say. And I looked at a few different languages based on some of your data from the group, and I tested Phoenician. So these are Phoenician runes or glyphs, I guess we could say. And I just tested out to see if these were Phoenician letters, what would they mean? and you have door and eye together. You have multiple windows. You have eye and a mark and an eye, and then door and eyes. And I was thinking, maybe, I don't know. It's interesting that the characters resemble Phoenician, because we'll see a little bit more later how that's relevant. But the idea of the two doors with the eyes, the windows, because the concept of window did come up a few times. And Jeff, you had this idea of one inlet, two outlets, so entries into this craft. And Chris, you had this idea. So this curved rotation, you had the struts of the base of the ship. And then you had the Lahiona thing with the cross on the sphere, that navigation device. So I just thought it was interesting. Here, Jeff, you're trying to figure out what the code is, the password, deciphering it, and you have this key that's pi, and it's something to do with destination and calling for help. And I thought that was really interesting. I looked into Ainu, which is this Japanese, well, they're separate and distinct from the Japanese people, but they do live in the northern islands of Japan. And it looks a little bit like some of their script might fit that as well, because you'd have to say this is probably an approximation of what the fishermen had seen and were trying to describe. And I just thought it was interesting that the sign for doorway is kind of a triangular shape with a little circle on the side. So this could have been maybe related to the Ainu language that's dying out. And John picked up on odd language as well. Chris, you had the idea of broadcasting. And then we come to Cody. So Cody submits this, and I look at this and I'm like, yeah, there's something he's getting at, this coding that's on the side of the ship. And he has it as carvings on stone, but I put it on this slide because to me it's clear that he's trying to depict this maybe Japanese kind of script. And then Cody, if you want to talk about this, because you did your own analysis on this, and so I'll give you the floor if you want to talk about what you're able to do with your analysis, and I'll just take a little pause while you do that.
Yeah, well, when I got the feedback, I was looking it up, and then I thought it kind of looks a bit like that, and I was flipping it around and mirroring it, and it all kind of fits. So that's how it's written in Japanese. So every way I did it, I could kind of make it fit. So, yeah, it was worth looking at.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
So, yeah, every way it kind of fits. So I think me subconscious was trying to spit that out somehow. It was the one on the right, on the top left one. The middle one was the one that caught my eye, and then I thought that looks a bit like how they write in Japanese.
Very interesting.
Yeah. And these were just sketches for you. You never wrote down or learned Japanese.
No.
Yeah.
No, I was just trying to make it look like there was a carving on the stone. I didn't really think about it. But then when I got the feedback and I was looking it up, it says hollow boat in Japanese up the top there. And I thought I'll see if that'll fit. And every way I could get it to fit.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, I want to say,
cool.
I think that's incredible. I was blown away. I think the analysis that you did here, that's the kind of analysis that I like to see done, to be honest. I think that's amazing, taking the time to go through and look for those things. That's kind of the level of analysis that I apply to my own work and to David's work. And so I think it's often worth taking the time to go through our data when you know you're on target, and try to figure out as much as you can, because the data stream is offering you this data. And so I think it's just to honor that and try to figure out what it's communicating to you. We have a message in chat from Stephen Halls, who says the I Ching symbols often are placed around a circular center symbol like the yin yang. And that is actually one of the symbols on the craft. And so we'll show that as well. But yeah, so I think, Cody, that was an amazing job. And thank you for sending that to me. I was really blown away by that. It was really, really nice, really good work. And there was also, so because I tried a couple different languages, so here's this ancient writing system from Peru, because I think, Claudia, I think it was your session that had the word Peru in it. So I thought, I'll just check to see if there's anything there. And that's why having all these different remote viewers and having all these data points, maybe the word Peru, maybe that's not the location of the event, but it might give us a clue to unlocking some of the data. So it's still useful data for me as the analyst. And I do think that there is some intriguing, and to be honest, because I was looking into the Peruvian language, that's actually how I started down the path that led me to the Ainu language. And so it was kind of that path of synchronicity that I needed to follow. John here as well talked about this, an ancient Latin, maybe an older form of language, a style that even Latin might have come from. And so I thought that was interesting as well. And Jeff, you had this kind of E shape with the extra line, and that comes up in the code. And so that was nice to see. And John has it as an E as well. So again, that really cool corroboration between your data. That was really nice. And Michael picking up on this kind of archaeological expedition that I felt that I was on while doing analysis. So that was really nice to see. So I think everyone's data on this and just how it all came together, I think that was really, really interesting. Yeah. And so there is, there have been researchers who've tied it to symbols that were found on Rendlesham Forest in the 1980s. And I think it's interesting. However, I'm not convinced enough because it was only a one symbol match. And in the same way that we have a one symbol match with Peruvian, and we have a few symbols that match with Ainu, I would say, to me, it's not strong enough to make me think that it definitely is the same culture or language that's on the Rendlesham UFO. But it's still interesting. And then here's a symbol that Stephen Halls in chat was mentioning, the yin yang with the I Ching signs around it. And it matches what they depict as on the craft, what some of the depictions show. And Chris, you had this shell-like shape and, the yellow color, and it feels like a symbol. So I was wondering if you were trying, maybe if that was the data that was coming through. And John, again, he had the Lahaina device. I thought that was a good match, but it also kind of matches the symbol on the top of the craft as well a little bit. So I thought it was maybe for analysis, I like to kind of be open and not just decide on one interpretation of the data. There's also this ancient Russian symbol that when you look at it closely, you see it's actually Roman as well. It's the Vatican's P with the cross across, or the X over it. And that'll come up later. But so I thought it was interesting that there's all this corroborating data and all your work about this. Here is an artist, a Japanese artist, made a sculpture of the craft, and you can see that the woman has red hair, because that is in all the original accounts, or all the ancient accounts. They do mention that she was a redhead, and that's what made her so weird to them, and in some ways frightening to them. And her skirt is often depicted very much like this, and it really does remind me of the fish people Sumerians have described. Just the kind of the skirt with the fish scale kind of pattern and the red head. And there's some interesting ideas, I think, that go on there, especially because we always talk about the Sumerian gods that always have the handbag and what's in the handbag. And I actually think it might be the constellation Libra, but still it's interesting that there's a lot of interest in the handbags. And when it comes to the utsuro-bune incident, she has a box with her, and she doesn't let anyone touch the box that she has with her. She's cherishing it. And that's part of the mystery. What was in the box? And so again, here's just some information about her. People have been studying this, trying to figure out who this woman was and why she had red hair and was washing up on the shore of Japan. And in Russia, they had this style where a lot of the Russian women at the time had red hair, and they would put artificial white extensions. And the woman here was actually described as having red hair, but with white powder in it. And so that's something that would have matched for a Russian woman. And sometimes instead of powder, they would use white fur as extensions, as hair extensions. And so, Claudia, you had a lot about fur. And I thought, I wonder if that's related to this. And then the woman, so Michael had this woman with a lion and a little heart. And Chris, you had the hands holding the heart as the shape for the craft. And so when I saw the heart here in Michael's session, I thought, okay, that's kind of interesting that he has the same kind of shape for the craft. He has the woman and then the lion. And that's kind of making me try to figure out, okay, so what is that telling us about her, the symbols or the logos or the emblems of her maybe home country or home tribe. Jeff, you have a Mona Lisa type Italian woman in a bell-shaped covering. Again, very, very good data, the woman in the craft. And Chris, you picked up on a predominant female, the sense of melancholy, fear, but she's strong and independent, courageous. I thought this was such, and part of a higher class. So this fits the data so well because obviously she's alone in this craft, who knows for how long. She's obviously afraid. She's found by fishermen. And I think just the courage of whatever it is that got her there. So did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yep. So I got the sense that she was afraid, but really strong. And also in terms of clothing, I had a weird feeling about the clothing. And so in the end, I put that it was like business clothing, but I didn't know how to draw it. And that's why I did some weird things. And so you see that I spent a long time with my pen in the middle because I was like, I have business clothing, but I don't know how to draw that thing. And so I was hesitating, but it was weird clothing. And I mean, it makes sense if it's from 200 years ago. And
yes. And the kind of jackets that they show. So if I go back to this, right, it's kind of it's a suit jacket to some extent. So I can see why that would feel like a business outfit. Yeah. And Jeff, did you want to say something about how you picked up on the Mona Lisa kind of vibe?
So that was the one point of the session where it was as though my pen just took off on its own. There was no thought that went into that whatsoever. I just drew.
Nice. Sometimes you just have to trust. And the automatic writing just does the right thing. And so here again, Michael's picking up on texture like velvet and synthetic textile. And Jeff, you had the idea of royalty or majestic. And there are theories that she would have been an upper class woman to be sent in this way with these foods and the silks that were found and just these unknown fabrics to the Japanese fishermen villages. Yeah. And so here, if you guys can talk about your data here a little bit, Chris, you have ocean unknown hidden, this idea of the current that's flowing. Michael had this river. Jeff had this river. Cody, you have this feeling like a current underwater. You're using the same words as Chris, so I thought that was really interesting. If you guys can talk about that, and Michael wants to join, but I need to resend him a link because it didn't work for him. So if you guys want to talk about that.
Yeah, the synchronicity is pretty startling, and also just under what's here on the screen, ocean unknown hidden bubbles, I have a very, very like 2D small sketch, but that looks very similar to the one of Cody, of something circular making bubbles in the ocean.
Yeah, the whole target, I was battling a castle of that structure in the water off Japan, whatever that's called. I don't remember, but so that's why there's a lot of like pillars and columns and all that sort of stuff. But that kind of felt in that sketch there a bit like a cave with water inside it. And I didn't know what to make of it at the time.
Yeah, and that's the Unaguni. Is that what it's called, Unaguni? Irish Patrick also had that. And I think I missed it on a slide. I think but it might come back on another slide. But yeah, and so you weren't the only one that picked up on that. And so again, it's amazing to see because you're picking up on the right country because it is Japan. And you're picking up on ruins off the coast of Japan. So very good data here. And just nice to see everyone kind of picking up on the similar elements. And then here, Michael had these bluffs in the distance, and Jeff, you had this butte by the water, and Dutch Patrick had these group of people, and there's splashing sounds, there's someone talking, they're kind of excited, and also this feel of this being old or maybe even ancient, water dripping, cool and foggy. That was nice that everyone's kind of converging on a description of Japan. Of bluffs. So here's where we start talking about what was going on. How did this person end up here? Enough about the descriptions of the ship. Let's talk about what's going on. And so a lot of you picked up on this idea of there's an emergency, there's a rescue mission, there's Space Force, aerial force, there's motion in water or space or both, that the emergency is a timed event. John is talking to us about the synchronized event. Coordination and timing and location are the most important. They're trying to locate and intercept. And so if this was a princess that was being traded to the Chinese overlords, and if she escaped, then it would make sense that they would actually send a mission after her. And then what do you have here? Wreckage searching. I feel there's a modern technology being used to find something. That was really interesting to me. And John has this sense of something like Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So again, he's naming Japan as the target location. And Jeff, you have this idea of managing secrets for an escape, to flee, to regroup, and the sense of fear. And so I thought that was really interesting that you all picked up on the same thing. That was, very cool to see. And then here's more of it. So Jeff, you have a sense of war and the flag of a country taken over, no longer existing. That was really intriguing. And then being defeated in this war, tragedy. And then Chris as well, you had the word war in your data. And fighting, people are talking about it, debating, fighting over it. There's opposing forces, maybe a debate. And that brings us back to one of the earlier slides where John had the two people that were coming to an agreement. And he has this idea of representational United Nations group, a collective or society. And Chris, you have that fighting, attacking, defending. So people here, you're all kind of picking up on this idea of conflict and to different extremes. So that was really, really nice to see. And then I'm trying to figure out, okay, so who is the battle between? And Jeff, you came through with this idea of this Oman duck, a name associated with duck or birds. And what's really funny about that is that then John had the snake and the hawk as the two opposing forces. So he's also bringing up the birds. And Claudia, you have DNA, reptiles, aliens all together in one section of your session. And that, I think, matches well with John, who he's trying to investigate this concept of the snake and the hawk, and he ends up bringing it back to reptile versus bird, that there's this aerial versus ground conflict. And when I looked into it, these are Tartarian flags. So this is here where, Jeff, you're talking about the flag of a country that's been taken over that doesn't exist anymore. Well, Tartaria is now Russia. And Russia came through in Chris's data and also in Claudia's. And so I thought, that's kind of interesting that we have these references to Russia and the Tartarian flag. And the Tartarian flag has the owl, which is the bird, and the dragon, which is a kind of reptile. a winged snake. So there's a bit of a link there to support that argument. But there's also, at the time, there was the Qing dynasty with the dragon. And so that's also a winged snake. It's interesting. So I'm kind of leaving it open here. There was some data in John's session that did support as well that idea of Tartaria, which is now Russia. And the conflict being between Europe and Asia. So I don't know. I'm open to that, though. And then, Chris, you had this Poseidon's, what you call it, spear. And it was really interesting because this, we're looking at these Greek myths of Poseidon, and the snake and the hawk is a Roman symbol. And here we see it in a Byzantine Roman mosaic and another mosaic in Constantinople. And so again, we have John saying there's something maybe Greek or Roman. There's a relationship to that culture or to those countries. And he brings up, so he has this Latin phrase, capri alumni. And I looked it up for Latin, and it's pupils of the goat, or students of, it could also be described as students of Capricorn. And so again, this idea of, to me, that links it to the Poseidon and that idea of maybe Tartarian, because Tartaria is kind of linked with the Roman culture and civilization. So when I was looking for the snake and the hawk, and I find the eagle and the snake in the Roman art, I thought there might be a link there. I don't know what you guys think. Maybe not. And then here, so again, we have this Roman kind of soldier type in the water, ready to fight from John's session. And this is the snake with the wings. So again, the mixture of the snake and the hawk. And this is on the, what is it again? The Lachiona from the Mormons. Their magical device that helps them navigate and has a compass in it. So there's something I feel that's going on that's maybe not known to the mainstream about who was doing what where in the centuries before our own. Yeah. And so here we have the Ainu. So the Ainu, they're related to the Japanese just from intermarriage, but their tribe is actually quite distinct, and they're linked to other cultures because a lot of them have red hair and blue eyes, and that's just not a trait that you'll commonly find amongst the other Japanese people. And so there's something here. So the Ainu are related to these other tribes, though, and there's relationships with maybe some of the bloodlines that are coming out of Ireland and the Milesians. And the Milesians, their flag is a dead serpent. So again, we're talking about that snake, right? There's a link there that I find curious. And then here, there's just some of the chives is one of the types of homes that they build, and it's parallel to a river. And again, we had all that river data along with the boat data. And there's an entrance on the west side that serves as a storeroom, and that there's kind of links between the craft, how it's described, and this, and especially Jeff, your session where you have where the openings are, where the exit and the entrances are for that kind of room. And so I thought that's an interesting link to how the Ainu built their houses traditionally. And the Ainu regard this window. They have a ceremonial window in their houses, and it's sacred, and they're told to never look in through it. And so there's that link with everyone picking up on the window. I thought that was really weird and interesting. So I think she might have been Ainu. So what's happening in the 1800s? China is kind of going to war with Russia. Russia's trying to grab some land from China. And I know that this happened off the coast of Japan, but it's the same area, right? It's just either side of the water. And so, Claudia, you're picking up on people wanting to capture something living. And I think that they wanted to capture the woman. And so I was reading about the Ainu, and they were made to give tribute. And so they were offered, fur tributes had to be offered to the Qing dynasty, the Chinese overlords. And part of what they had to give them was women, their daughters. And so the Chinese aristocrats would marry the daughters of the tribe leaders of the Ainu. And so it seems like a lot of our data is pointing to this idea that maybe this was the daughter of the chieftain of one of the Ainu groups, who maybe just didn't want to be married off to a Chinese aristocrat, or maybe something happened to her craft on her way there. It's unclear. But John has this idea of admirable and seen as an honorable sacrifice or service. And that would have been the role of the daughters, to be sacrificed to these Chinese that they had nothing, not much knowledge of and nothing in common with, just to appease the tax obligations. And, John has to obtain something of equal value must be lost. And it's very sad, actually. Jeff, you have this idea of marking your territory, that you celebrate, but you're conquering. And in war, there's one winner and one loser, the birth of flags. So again, I think this might be pointing to something really sad, unfortunately. Ainu women in the early 1800s, so this is around the time of the craft, of the utsuro-bune incident. Ainu women were separated from their husbands and either subjected to rape or forcibly married to Japanese men as well. So the Chinese were scooping them up to make trade deals, and then the Japanese men were scooping them up just to try to homogenize the tribes, the populations in Japan, to have a stronger claim over the land. And so, Chris, you have this idea of a change in decision, something sudden, an escape, going in the opposite direction, looking the other way. So I do wonder if it was just a woman that was being sent off, and somehow either her ship didn't work well, or maybe she sabotaged it just to try to get away. Some of the tributes that would have been paid by the Ainu to the Chinese would have been rice, salt, necessities, gifts. And so that kind of matches with what we were seeing that they describe as being in the craft, right? And Michael talks about canisters of paint and consumables that matches the data. But the canisters of paint, I thought that was very strange to have paint and food. And when I looked into it, the Manchu officials, some of the tributes that they were giving, or that the Ainu were giving to the Chinese, included the Ainu lacquerware, which is a paint, essentially. And so, first of all, that's great data from Michael that he's picking up on these canisters of paint. And you can see in this image here, these blue canisters of paint that were given as tribute. So I thought that was a really nice link. Yeah. And then here's another point that the data brought forward. So the Ainu, when men and women become engaged and they learn that their engagement has been arranged, they exchange gifts. And the man sends the woman a small engraved knife and a workbox and a spool and other gifts. And then she sends him embroidered clothes and other things. And so it's funny that the story has this woman who has a special box. She doesn't let anyone touch the box. She doesn't let anyone take her box. And I'm wondering if it's the workbox from her fiance, or maybe from the man she wanted to marry before she was shipped off to be sent to marry a Chinese aristocrat. I wonder if that's part of what it was. And here's just some information from different sources that talk about the Ainu being blue-eyed, blue irises, red hair was mentioned often blonde and red hair, blue and green eyes. And Claudia, you had orange hair coming through in a few of your sessions. Here's an Ainu leader. And so you can see that this person clearly has very pale eyes and looks a lot more Caucasian. And so they're very different genetic roots. And then we come to the faces. So this, again, Cody, I'll let you say a little bit about this, because you submitted these two faces, the statue face, and then this face that matches the samurai masks. And I would have missed this if you hadn't noted it. So I'll let you say something about that.
Yeah, the first one, I thought it was more of a Buddha statue or something like that. And the second one was right at the end of my session, and I was bored and I just felt like drawing that. So somehow it fit. I really didn't think it had anything to do with it. I can't hear.
You're on mute, Sasha.
Sorry. I was just saying that's the kind of the magic of the automatic writing when you're a remote viewer, and you just learn to trust, and you kind of feel like, why am I drawing this? And it's like you said, you're kind of tired. You're at the end of your session, you start drawing something, you don't really know why. You're just kind of wasting time, and then you realize that that is an important sketch for the target. I think that happens a lot, so it's good to be open to that. We have a comment from Bijou in chat, and she says an Asian man half translucent appeared to her after she meditated and told her he was her guardian angel. And so I think that that's an interesting little experience. And so yeah, and so I do think Jeff as well, you had this face, and I thought it links up with the idea of these samurai masks, and Michael had this texture with these colored dots, and that actually fits the samurai, what do you call it, the armor, I guess, that they wore. Did actually have the little dots on them, the little colored points on them, and you can see it here on the hat. So I thought that was kind of good. And Claudia, I think you had this timeline, and I think for the woman where she's educated, she's married off, and then she's shipped off at sea, a lot of traveling, and then she becomes this famous public person that we're still talking about 200 years later. I thought that was interesting for a timeline. And John here has the yin yang, which we saw earlier as a logo on the side of the ship, maybe. And this idea of joining of two parties for friendship, and divided parties become one. And again, that supports the idea that this was a tribe chieftain's daughter being traded for peace. We'll give you the daughter of the tribesman to the Chinese, and then the Chinese won't go to war with you. They'll just let you keep existing on the northern Japanese island, right? And so it looks like maybe that's part of what was going on. I thought it was really nice that John had he had these 3 islands, but when I looked at them, I was like, oh, the shape of these islands, they kind of remind me of Japan. And so I pulled up Google, and sure enough, like I think it's a slightly distorted, but I think you can see that there's a resemblance here with Hokkaido, the tip of Hokkaido that has this kind of weird tail on it. And then I actually think that this is Shikoku reversed. If you flip this around, you can kind of see Shikoku. And then to me, this looks a little bit like just kind of the bottom area of Kyushu. So I actually think that, yeah, to me, I can see when you remote view, especially for things like maps, you can be a little bit distorted. You can be a little bit reversed sometimes. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. But I've seen it in David's work and my own, where coastlines, the more you draw them, the better they become. So I recognized it in John's work. I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure those are the islands of Japan. So, John, every now and again, there's a remote viewer who really connects with a target. And I've seen it from all of you on different targets. And John, I feel really connected with this one in particular, with the battle that was going on. And so that was really interesting to see. And so he's talking here, right? He has ancient locations, otherwise thought to be legend or myth. Maybe that would be Tartaria, the now Russia. Create something of an uproar, claim to ownership, who should own the land, or man-mades on the island, an isolated parcel of land. But it could also refer to the Ainu, right, that were trying to be their own independent tribe and then fell under the rule of, the Japanese, but also to a certain extent the Chinese. And so then he has this large mass of energy emitting from a man-made that's falling or descending onto a highly populated area, and the balance of the 2 hemispheres. I just thought that was a nice little summary. And then here, Jeff, you're talking about what's in the box, and you're talking about a battery, but not a battery, but a force multiplier. The answers to all the questions is built inside this box. And John also has this idea of a battery container, something like this, semi-cylindrical. And Cody again, you had that idea of a satellite and this man holding something, and it's emitting radio waves, but it looks like he's holding a box-like device. And so again, this idea of maybe this weird energy device. Jeff, did you want to say something about what you were picking up on?
I'm not sure what to say other than I'm very proud of my little lightning bolts. That seemed to be an important part of it. There was energy associated with the box, a lot of energy.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, and I just think that's an interesting corroboration. The battery container that you're both saying, it's like a battery, not quite a battery, something like it. And then you also had this idea of radar scan, remote sensing, locating, and John also had that idea of trying to find something, trying to calculate where it will land. So that was interesting. And Claudia, you had this idea of an investigation, experimenting and exploring. So I think that it all kinds of fits a little bit. I think it's interesting in any case. The fishermen ended up being too afraid of her because they couldn't understand her language. So they pushed her back out to sea. They basically, and then we don't know what happened to her from there. And so this idea of far distances and exploration, and Claudia exploration as well. Looking for something missing, making sense of something. I think, and then Jeff, here's your river, here's the coast, and I thought, I think this is interesting data, and I think maybe it fits if you're looking at a woman who's from maybe Russian, Tartarian, Phoenician, Ainu aristocracy, and what she looks like to a fishing village in Japan, how foreign or alien she would seem. There's other corroborations that were just kind of cool. So Michael had a fountain in a garden, and Cody, you had a fountain well as well. And Cody, I was looking at yours and I was thinking, it's a circular shape with this base, there's water in it. So I wasn't too clear if this might actually be the craft having sunk. But the idea that you have as a fountain, and Michael also has this idea of the fountain, I thought that was a nice little link. And Michael had this idea of leather, black leather, and so did you, Claudia. And so I'm wondering if there was leather involved in putting the wood together and then the metal strips together for the base. I wonder if that's kind of what you guys were maybe more alluding to. Jeff, you had the light show, the spotlights, and so did John. A lot of people picked up on that light in the water, looking for this missing woman. And then where is it now? Cody had this idea of something sunken. And John had this idea of the target is extremely wanted by high authority. Bodies used as or for an energy source. Again, if you're trading women for good treatment from the overlords, I think that makes sense. Two parties reign from the following continents, Europe and Asia. Seems to be working together to maximize the results. I think that was really good data. And so here we get to, you mentioned this earlier, Cody, the castle structures that were submerged underwater and the pillar. And that was really interesting to me because then Claudia has this whale, the bubbles underwater, and a castle-like structure. And then Jeff has this whale beside this kind of structure here, and he has fish swimming around it. And he also has this circular structure. And then Cody, in your session, you also have this circular structure with the pillars in the bottom of the ocean. Dutch Patrick has this structure with this hollow entrance, and you, Cody, have this underwater opening, some kind of a portal of some kind, and your fountain here is abandoned. And then we have Jeff, who has this tower-like, a pillar-like thing that's right by the river. And John has something sunken, that battery-like thing that both he and Jeff were describing. Now it looks like it's at the bottom of the ocean. And so you're all describing this structure, I think, at the bottom of the ocean. So I'm interested in what you make of that.
I'd say it's at the bottom of the ocean.
Right? Yeah. And maybe because it's been there for 200 years, so I think it's starting to fall apart. And so John gave GPS coordinates, and I searched them. I actually think this here might be a good place if someone wants to go diving looking for downed UFOs. You might find one off the coast of Taiwan that is related to this incident, because this is 27 and 147. He has 27 and minus 47. But I think, again, when you're trying to get numbers precisely with remote viewing, it's a little bit hard to get them as precise as you want. So I think that's close enough. He also had, I tried different versions of his numbers, and in one I had the location that some people say Atlantis is in the middle of the ocean, and there were some references to Atlantis in the data as well. So I thought that was just kind of cool and fun. But I do think that this location right here would make sense for right off the coast of Taiwan. And that's it for that target. So what are your thoughts about that?
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I was a bit off to my idea, but I started with the furry red thing, and then I interpreted it as an animal, whereas it probably was the woman.
Yeah.
But I kept on seeing the shark mouth, with the teeth. So maybe she ended up very dreadful.
I think so. Yeah. I think her craft sank. Yeah. Jeff, what did you think? You had a lot of corroborations with the other data today.
I'm not sure what to say. When I started researching this after the reveal, I found one other very weird connection.
Okay.
So when the very first picture I drew for this target was actually of a very modern looking sort of Oriental man. And when I first looked up the target, when I first Googled it, it came up with a researcher who studied it a lot. And that researcher also studied the cult in Japan that had done the subway attack where there was like sarin gas released. And I drew the guy who was in charge of that cult. I'm sure of it.
Wow.
It's like that was like a stray piece at the beginning. I didn't follow up on it. It didn't fit in with the rest, but how that came through is just like strange. I don't know. I still don't understand this.
I know remote viewing is so weird, and it works in such weird ways.
Do you know the name of the investigator?
So I don't right off the top of my head.
Because I also had a man as a person, and I thought it was Dr. Kazuo Tanaka, the last person who investigated this myth, something like that. So I thought I was on a whole different road with that. So maybe it's the same guy as you.
Could be, yes.
Yeah. And that would be interesting as well in terms of, was there, we don't really know much about history. I think we think that the history that we're taught is always correct. But when I see how much of the news is incorrect, and I see how much of what's written about what happened 5 years ago is blatantly incorrect, it makes me really wonder how much of our history is incorrect. And that's why I really try to be open-minded to the data and let the data lead me for analysis. I'm really curious about the bird and the hawk, whether that was more representational of the aerial assault and the land. But then again, you have to ask, so who is it that had flying crafts in 1803? Right? And so, and if it wasn't a flying craft, if it was just a boat and the flying aspect of it is just being picked up by all the UFO stories, it's still very mysterious to pop a princess with furs and foods and paints, lacquers and things, and then ship her off and then just let her sink. So it's strange whichever story you take, I think, or interpretation that you apply. So you guys all did really, really well on this one. I hope it was a fun one to see in terms of the reveal and to see everybody's data matching up. And
Yeah.
again, Cody, I wanted to say again, your decoding of the symbols, again, that was amazing. I hope more people are inspired by that and start looking at their own data in that way. It's worth doing. I've seen it work in a lot of cases. When you're getting that level of data, take the time, go through it, and use your psychic ability to tell you how to analyze it. Like, right? Like what I saw, Cody, was that you were kind of saying, okay, these are all the lines and the directions that they're in, and so how can I piece them together differently to make the symbols, right? And then I think it's amazing that you got the hollow boat characters. Yeah. So the next presentation is a lot shorter and it's a lot quicker. And the data is a little bit more simple. So we're just going to fly through it. Feel free to jump in as I go. Let me bring it up for you. While I'm bringing that up, feel free to talk amongst yourselves. Oh, and we have a comment from Steve Halls. You can reply to Stephen Hall. So his comment is, he sees symbolism everywhere. So there's no surprise that he sees it in these diagrams. Separation of realities, flow, portals. The UFO looks like a portal symbol to me. I think that's really, yeah. Stephen Halls has an amazing library of symbols. If you put your link in, Stephen, I'll approve it so that it can be seen by the public. But yeah, so he has these libraries of symbols that he collects from different art pieces and different things. It's interesting to see, and it's useful for analysis. If you see like the snake and the hawk, if you wanted to know more about that, you might go to his library and see if he has anything like that, and you'll just find a treasure trove of symbols. It's really cool to walk through. So I'll let you guys talk while I bring up the other slide set.
On what we've just seen, I'm not the biggest UFO enthusiast, but with all the data that you gave, to me, it really makes sense, the theory that she flew from, not flew, but like she flew away from somewhere in a weird shaped bubble boat that would have been seen as something really weird, and that she just ended up in the middle of nowhere. And the box and everything you said about the Ainu, it makes sense. So I would definitely see this as this being the story. She just got lost somewhere along the way and ended up there.
And if that's true, I was thinking I'm going to try reaching out to the Ainu, because their language is mostly extinct and they're dwindling group. And so there are efforts now to try to support the preservation of their culture. And so I was thinking I'll try to get in touch with someone maybe who researches them and just offer them this live stream and say, yes, it's from remote viewing. And I know that a lot of people in the scientific community are kind of skeptical about remote viewing, but this is amazing data. And we found a lot of supporting links. And I think because there's so much interest in the utsuro-bune incident, if they could show that, yeah, this is actually an Ainu woman, I think that would be really good for the propagation of the, I don't know, the information of their culture, of their tribe, of their ancient ways. So yeah, I'm hoping someone picks that up. And also, it's just nice to see remote viewing used for, I think, one of its powerful purposes. You can use remote viewing to help solve problems. You just have to be open-minded. You have to have good remote viewers, and you have to do proper analysis. And I think that's how you get to something like this. I think someone else could have analyzed the data, decided it was a UFO before even seeing the data, and then tried to force the UFO idea onto this. But I think by being open to it, we were able to explore the different theories. And so, yeah. And I thank you for all the data that you submitted, because that's why it was so, I think, easier to find some of these links.
That also brings the topic of the truth about remote viewing. What are you seeing? Because in my data, I had like UFO disclosure, and even now, I don't believe it's a UFO. I believe in the story I just said. That's what my feeling tells me it is. Well, maybe I'm wrong. But it is known for being a UFO story. So it makes sense that you would get UFO related stuff inside of your remote viewing. But does it mean that it's the truth and that it is UFO related or not. That's a big topic, maybe for a presentation one day.
Yeah.
I guess we don't know much about it.
Well, that's one thing I always stress is that remote viewing doesn't give you truth. It just gives you data related to the target. And so if the UFO community has decided that this is a UFO and they talk about it and they write books about it and they have conference presentations about it, then that data exists in the data stream. And so when you're picking that up, it doesn't mean that it is UFO. It just means that there's information about it related to UFOs, right? So yeah, I think that's a good point.
As soon as there is a theory, there is a truth because somebody speaks about it. So it exists.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So I think I was glad to see that you were all very good about not getting lost in one theory or another. That's one of the things that I thought this group is so strong on. You all gave me data about the spacecraft, the boat, but none of you let it contaminate your whole session. You were all very level-headed, and I appreciated that. I think that makes for better data. So now we're going to jump into divine light. And again, like I said, I'm going to rush through this quickly.
Light.
Yeah, so the divine light of the sefirot. And we're also going to touch on using the Ganzfeld flicker to improve remote viewing visuals and whether that's torture or something that makes you throw up or whether it actually is good and useful. We're going to touch on those topics today. And so the sefirot is for the audience, it's the divine light of God in the Kabbalistic belief system. There are different Kabbalistic belief systems. There's Judaism is the one commonly known, but there's also Christian Kabbalism. And so they have this idea of the divine light is the Ein Sof, and then it expresses itself through our reality in different ways. And the chakra system has been very much, there's bi-directional influence, I think, there in these ideas of the progression towards the divine light. So you start at the bottom and then you have to work your way up to that white light moment for enlightenment, or in terms of the Ein Sof for talking to God. And Michael is joining us. Hello, Michael. No, that's not Michael. That's John. Sorry. Hi, John.
Hey.
How are you doing? We just covered your data from the utsuro-bune session. You had so much data, so you'll have to replay the live stream. And when you're not in the middle of driving, you can maybe talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, sorry about that. I just got off work, so I was like, maybe I'll beep in and see if they're still on. So.
Nice. So you'll be here for the divine light of the sefirot. So that's good. And at the end, we can revisit some of your data if you wanted to talk about it a little bit for your other one. And so the target was mostly the sefirot, Ein Sof. And one of the things I explained to the viewers before I started the live stream was I was curious about the light. Remote viewers often talk about light, looking into light, seeing light. There's kind of a lot of data about that. But I didn't want to send them all into NDEs. I didn't want to send them off into the path of aliens. I wanted to keep them all very safe. And so I thought that this might be a safer way of exploring. And I didn't want to give them, source or God as a target, because then you get a lot of myth and religious overtones, and it's really hard to parse out what's just fantasy, what's just myths and stories, and you don't really get, I don't think, a lot of useful information that way. And also because depending on the mental discipline of the viewer, sometimes they're just telling you what they think God is all about. And so I thought maybe by giving the sefirot the white light, the divine light through this lens, it would allow the viewers to pick up maybe similar information, but through a more intellectual avenue. So I just thought I would test that out to see. And the data that came back was really interesting. So here's a little bit about the sefirot. God is Ein Sof, meaning infinite, endless, limitless, inseparable one. But at the same time, it emanates in these 10 different ways, which are called the sefirot. these are the characteristics or stages of creation, and they're mapped onto our human experiences. That's how we manifest the divine light within our own selves and our own lives. And so here's the, people know this, the tree of life. That's kind of how people know the sefirot in a lot of circles. And so I thought it was really interesting that both Dutch Patrick and Chris had the word awe. People are in awe, they're experiencing awe. I thought that was a really nice little corroboration. And John, now that you're here, I thought it was amazing that you got the Shaolin monk. I thought that was a really good data point here. And you had these white, pearly, small grouping together of these circles that are connected with these lines. And that's a really nice overview of the sefirot. And Dutch Patrick also had these circles connected on this line. So again, very good corroboration there and just nice to see. And then Dutch Patrick has this idea of a ladder, a frame, something fancy, lateral, and transcendental. That's, I think, perfect description of the sefirot. And John, you have bonding through chemical reactions with radio wave-like influences that have been given specific aliases or code names. I thought that was fascinating data because it brings in that idea of frequencies. And a lot of people who meditate will play different tones, right? People, they all have, they'll listen to 586 or 696 tones or 396 tones while they meditate to kind of help them achieve different states. And so I think that idea of these radio wave-like influences is actually quite relevant. And this idea of each of them having been given a code name, that's kind of what the sefirot is. So you have all these levels of manifestations of light, and they all have their own name and their own interpretation. There's kingship, foundation, splendor, beauty, strength, kindness, wisdom. And so these are all the different code names. So I thought that was a really nice, in one sentence, a summary of the target. And Jeff, this was the first image in your session was this kaleidoscope. And again, I think that was perfect for light that's separated out into its different parts. So very good data there. And so, so the sefirot are divine emanations. They're often described as flame for Ein Sof, the divine light. It emanates from above to below. So it starts at the top and comes downwards through us. And so I think a lot of people picked up on that. Here we have Cody, that you have a sense of something being still, but somehow it's still in motion, or there's still an energetic component. And I think that's a really good description of what's going on here. And you have these circles on the stems and they're in motion. There's this directional aspect to it. So that's brilliant data. And it matches with John's circles and his spherical things that are conjointed. And he says some sort of council. In some interpretations of the sefirot, they do kind of ascribe personalities kind of things to each of the circles. So the idea of a council actually does match really well. And John also has that sense that you picked up on, Cody, of like moving together, that you can't move without all of the links agreeing to move together. So I thought that was really interesting. And then Dutch Patrick, again, he has this idea of a force field where there's a smaller one and it's affected by the larger one. And so just the level of complexity of the concepts that you're describing, that you're getting in your data, is really good to see. It's really amazing. And then here's just a really fun little slide where you can all see that you're all getting extremely similar data here. The correspondences are just amazing. Cody has a ring with the hollow ring with a circle nearby it, and Chris has the again circular ring with a weird point in the off center. Irish Patrick has a halo around this concentric rings, and Michael has this very similar to Irish Patrick's sketches, and Jeff, to yours as well, where you have this kind of ring with a halo around it and the circles in the center. And Chris also had the rounded, hollow, curved, and then Dutch Patrick had this sense of something big circular with a small circle inside and the emanation. And Claudia, you had as well this metal silvery kind of ring, shimmering lights. So everyone's data here is really good. This is the tree of life, but there's also this other way of presenting the sefirot, which is the concentric circles. And so again, I think that it's just fun to see just how similar your images or your sketches are coming through as. Chris, you had this shape. Do you want to say a little bit something about it? Because I matched it up with Claudia's bell-shaped object, and with Michael had this idea of a chain under tension. And Jeff, you had this roof of a majestic stone building. And so I felt like there was enough of a connection here. One of the often used description of the sefirot is that the light, the divine light, pours into reality, into tangible matter, into humans, like water poured into a glass. And it takes the shape of the glass, but it doesn't change. The nature of the water itself doesn't change. So Chris, over to you.
It was 20 sessions ago, so I don't remember that well, but I remember that, and you can see it on the slide, that shape was a bit obsessive. I redid it quite a few times after. And yeah, the only thing I can say is I had a bit that feeling of a wormhole thing where something is coming in and going out.
Yes. And so I saw that as the light, it's the receptacle of the light coming in, right? And then going out as it moves through us and into the rest of reality. So that was really nice. And Claudia, can you tell us something about this cone-like shape? To me, there was a parallel here with what Chris was drawing and the idea of liquid. But I was wondering how you interpreted that.
Oh, it's already also a long time ago. Yeah. So yeah, I had also, yeah. No, sorry, I cannot. No, I don't know exactly anymore. Something went through this energy or water.
Yeah.
Or yeah.
Yeah. So I think that was a nice little parallel there. So I put those together. And then here, Jeff, you have the power of the sun, building energy one electron at a time. And I love that for what this is, for this target. And Chris had similar data, strong natural lightning, yellow energy fire, natural phenomenon light. That really came through strong and natural. And Irish Patrick had very similar data as well, that idea of light, glowing, soft, infrared light. So one of the data points that Patrick had throughout his session was this idea of there's darkness and then there's infrared light, and that there's this idea of geometry maybe inside. So that there's a pattern. And so I thought that was really, really nice to see. And here, Cody feels like internally there's motion energy that's moving, bright flash of light. And you have the idea of a particle beam and a laser beam. And a laser beam is a beam of coherent light. And that's exactly what the target is. I was saying, tell me about the divine light that's coherent. And so I thought that was really nice in your session that you addressed it so directly. And Irish Patrick has this idea of spectrum of light and the frequency, and that it's patterned and it's penetrating. And so that was really good data. And he has this idea of oscillation. Cody, you have circular large humming motion or energy. And Jeff had this idea of absorbing radar waves. My PowerPoint kept crashing while I was doing my slides, so I lost a couple slides along the way. So if you don't see a piece of data you feel like should be there, I'm not ignoring your data. I just lost a couple of slides, I think. But also I have more slides later on some of these concepts. Yeah, but I thought that this was good. And Cody, I wanted to say something here. Feels like internally there's motion that's moving quickly. I'm going to touch on that a little bit later, but when you're in a certain state for remote viewing, I feel like that really applies. And so I wanted to kind of highlight that. So we'll talk about it. There's another slide that's going to come up. I think it's here. And so you have this spiral-like shape, wavy motion direction, moving direct. It spins around constantly. Michael also has this rotating shaft. And Irish Patrick has a ring of cohesive or coherent something or other. And John has a type of sync or a process of some kind. Patrick has this low frequency movement. So you're all picking up on this idea of this motion. And Cody makes it really clear that it's the spiral motion. And I know that for me, when I get into a certain state of meditation or a certain frequency state that's maybe more conducive to psychic experiences, I do see the spiral. I do see reality starting to spiral. So I feel it, I experience it. And I was talking to another remote viewer a couple weeks ago, and she was saying she also experiences reality kind of bending and spiraling when she's remote viewing, when she's projecting to a target. And so it was so interesting for me to see that in your data that really describes an experience that I have that I find sometimes hard to describe, because it's not that I see it in front of me, but like I really conceptually have that sense of I'm rotating in a spiral, or my consciousness is. So I wanted you to just to say a few words about this.
Yeah, I couldn't describe this target. I tried my best, but it was just energy. That's all it was. It was just moving.
Yeah.
I did not know what I was looking at. It's just constantly moving, and all you could see was the lights. That's all I could see the whole time. And but there's also you know something at like a microscopic level as well that you needed special equipment to see. But all you could visually see was the light, and it's all I just kept going back to. The whole session was this light that was spinning. So I don't know.
Well, I think, I mean, that's what the target was. Tell me about the divine light. And I think a lot of us experience that, the rotation, the spiraling energy of it when we get into those deeper states. So I think that's great data. And other people did, we'll see a little bit later, other people picked up on spirals as well. And so here's just everyone picking up on sound, white noise, lightning, humming sound, frequencies, whistling sounds. Everyone's kind of picking up on this weird frequencies, which is good data. And again here, so Claudia sees this old text, and you see this script, and it's maybe like Egyptian text or something, and you wrote it out, and I'm glad you did, because it actually does match, I think, the Hebrew written in one of the ways of representing the sefirot. And Dutch Patrick has this idea of it's an evolved language, and it's like it's everywhere. And that's a perfect match for this, because this is a depiction of not just our reality, but the divine light coming into all the layers of reality and all the expressions of it. And so here we're starting to see the spiraling. So Chris, you just have this mad spiraling going on, and Patrick as well, spiraling with a spiral coming out of it. And Cody, here's your spiraling. And Michael, I really like how he drew it. So he has the front aspect, the circle with the energy that we see in Patrick's work as well. But then he kind of draws a side view, and he has the integration of the dark with the light. And Patrick picks up a lot on that idea of there's darkness, and then there's this infrared light. And to see it in Michael's sketch, I thought that was really nice. Cody, you have this like a circle with a ring and a halo around it, and so does Dutch Patrick. So very, very nice, very, very strong corroborating data here. And then again, just more of the same, right? More of these patterns that are coming through that match the representation. And then here's some, Patrick has these white orbs flowing around it. There's some kind of a flow around it. Michael has this kind of arcing, curling, energetic, and moving towards something smaller. Again, just this idea of vibration, energetic, very similar data across the board. And then here is something, John, your data pointed me to something that opened up a whole new branch that made sense of other people's data. So in your session, John, you had Rose Vault or Rosenbit. And when I looked at that and I thought, yeah, there's something here. So I started looking into it, and then I stumbled across the Kabbalistic Order of the Rose Cross. And all of a sudden, that makes more sense of Jeff's rose flower, with the petals being the circles of the sefirot. And then Claudia, you had as well, right? The tree of life, it's a plant, it's a healing plant. But you had these flowers in this transparent pot. And Jeff, you have this powerful symbol of respect, the cross. And I just thought very, very nice that all this data kind of came through because of the Rose Vault data point in John's, because I was like, I feel like you were trying to make sense of it. And so I felt like it was important because you're trying to break it down. What is this word that's coming through? And because of that, I paid a little bit more attention to it. And so it just unlocked all this other data. So I thought that was really nice. And Claudia, you have finding the secret elements most important, and that idea of like a black tulip or some kind of rare species of flower. So again, I think this is the power of analysis and also of group remote viewing, because I don't think that I would have unlocked it quite as well. So yeah, so that was really good. John, I know you're driving, but I don't know if you want to talk or not, but if you wanted to say a little bit about the Rose Vault.
Yeah, I couldn't figure out what exactly it was. It was almost as if it was being kept from me, and I'd been watching some YouTube videos about like not letting, as a remote viewer, not letting I don't know how to describe it, but you're self-conscious.
Yeah.
We're higher beings as well, so it's like try not to let anything block you. It's just as much as your dad as it's yours. But I was trying to, it was Rose something like Rose, and I just couldn't get the ending of the word, so I just summed it up as vault. But it had something to do with like the a higher rose of order of some sort.
Yes. And that's exactly what it is. It's the Kabbalistic order of the Rose Cross. And even the idea of the vault, it's the sacred container of the light. It's the vault that you put the light into. And so I just thought that was so intriguing and so nice. I love when that kind of thing kind of happens. And so I see it in some viewers' work where they get a data piece, and it's like John is saying, you can operate at this level and be shielded and have trouble accessing data. And when you're in that position, it's like John says, you remind yourself, I'm a sacred being. I am the divine light. The divine light moves through me. And so I can access all the data because I am part of all that data. And so I think that that's the thing, is to find ways when you feel like data is hidden from you, that there are ways that you can get around the blocks, that you can actually find that data and access it. And so whenever I see people trying to figure out, I saw in Jeff's session for the previous target, where you were decoding, decrypting, typography. You're trying to figure out what is that about. And so again, it's that idea of like, that there's something important, you don't quite have it, and you're just trying to work it out. And I think that all of remote viewers should do that. Just work through it and, take the time, because it does bring out good data. And then everyone has grids. And I think this talks about the nature of our reality, or how we understand it to be, this idea of a grid. When we did the, when we did the Dr. Emoto rice experiment target, a lot of you had that idea of cubes and grids of reality. And so it was interesting that it came up again here. And I think nearly all of you had at least one idea of either cubes or grids, or this assortment of these layers of things. So we have Irish Patrick, who's talking about the grid, and we have Claudia, who has this wall, and she draws it like a grid, and it's a hidden wall. And so again, that idea of like the substrate of our reality is hidden from us to some extent. Patrick has all these grids throughout his session. Michael starts drawing grids as well. John, you had these kind of like structures in this kind of grid-like pattern, and I felt like that fit. Michael has this wall, so a lot like Claudia's wall, but he has this grid-like pattern on it. And then here we see the transition from the grid to the cubes. And so that was nice to see, and a lot of corroborating data. And Chris, here you have nearly the exact same picture as Dutch Patrick. And I did this, and I don't know, an hour later, I was kind of going through these slides again, adding a little bit of data here. And I thought, did I take the same data from Chris's and double it and accidentally put the yellow border around it? So I actually have to go back and check the Dutch Patrick session to find out that no, you both drew nearly the exact same thing, even to the point where you can see he has 2 lines here going in, and you have 2 lines here going in. And so I just thought the angle is nearly the same. It's really shocking to see. And so I thought that was just incredible. And I'll show you more of that. So Chris, you elaborated on it as a control tower, which is a really cool metaphor for what we're talking about, this control tower and this flower-like pattern on a tower. And Dutch Patrick as well, he has this pillar, and he's talking about a field, and it's shielded, but it's part of the environment, but it's a limited, and it's to keep things out or keep things in, and it has to do with light and frequency. And so and the laws of nature, a construction area for the laws of nature. So again, I just thought that was amazing data that came through. And Jeff, I put your little surveying equipment here as well, because I saw a little bit of a link there. And John's broadcasting signal in terms of Chris's control tower. So I don't know, Chris, if you wanted to say a few words about that.
Yeah, the symbology behind it is pretty cool. I can definitely see the pattern from the tower, and the previous one that was similar to Patrick's one was actually at the very beginning of the session. It was a visual ideogram. So it was really like a very first visual of how the target was.
Yeah, so I thought that was really stunning to see that corroboration, that mirroring. Stephen Hall from chat adds in that rose is an etheric outflow from the horizontal plane of a torus. Very interesting, and I think that that's what's represented in the rose cross order symbol. And so here we have the Kabbalistic tree of life, and Claudia is drawing trees, wildlife. Now, there's one word that I kept. By the time I saw the pattern in it, I was too tired to go back and find the word in all of your sessions and put it in. But nearly everyone had the word dangerous. And I'm not sure what to make of that, but I just wanted to share it with you so that you would know. And so here Claudia has it, this wildlife, dangerous, hidden location. And she has all these little trees, all the trees of life, or all these little Kabbalistic circles on their stems. And so someone else has something very similar, but I lost the slide, and then I couldn't remember whose session it was in. But someone else also had that sense of all these trees, and they had this very similar kind of sketching of the trees, and the aspect of hidden. And so I thought that was interesting. And Claudia, you had the idea of healing effects of this plant, and Patrick also picked up on the idea of healing. And I think, because we're in the psi field, we know about remote healing. And so I think it is related to consciousness. And so I think that's a good data point. You have the flower with the triangle on top. And again, you can see in the tree of life, there's the triangular kind of tetrahedron forms. And Chris, you have the stems, the angular connectors. Jeff, you had all these people at their little tables that were in a production line, and on Soft, the divine light is said to go through all these different layers and expressions of reality, and each one is a different layer or level. And so I thought that was actually good data. I thought that matched really nicely. And then here, Claudia, you have this big wide green landscape with only trees. And I know you thought of it as a jungle, but again, I think that I took it as a tree of life. And so I'm thinking about it in that sense, consciousness. And you felt that you're in search of something as if you want to prove that an extinct animal is still alive. And to me, I thought that was interesting in terms of proving, I don't know, the presence of the divine light or how it works, something along those lines. Oh, here's Michael, surrounded by trees, site of technical research involving light or sound. So again, it's that linking of the trees with the light. And there were some things that I found interesting in your little summary here, Claudia. The idea of experiments are done with it to duplicate cloning or to try to rebuild the thing and to see if it can communicate with us. And I thought that was kind of interesting in terms of trying to build, you know, in Kabbalah, there's the golem that doesn't have a soul and doesn't, when you remove his name from him, he ceases to exist as a robot of some kind. And I really think of that as AI, that when you give AI a name, you attribute a personality to it, you mistake it for something that has consciousness. And then when you take its name away, then you're reminded that it's just a machine and that it doesn't have that spark of divine light. And so I kind of saw parallels with that in your little summary here. Yeah. And so this idea that you feel as if you're looking for the secret of life and therefore wants to talk to animals, especially the ones that have these 9 lives, that's going to come up later. I thought that was just interesting, that idea that you're already picking up on this sense of 9 lives and the search for that. And then everyone's picking up on liquid in a cup. And a lot of people are talking about milk, milky white. So we have Irish Patrick, milky white light. And John has milky light color. And it's white and organized. And Claudia has these white moving balls. And so it was really kind of funny to see just the reference to milky white coming through. And then this idea of this light coming out of this triangle, I think that fits really well with the divine light up here coming out of the triangular structure of the sefirot. And John, you have this cup with this liquid coming out of it on top of a triangle. And Claudia has the cup with the liquid beside it. And Jeff, you have this cup with this triangle, or you have this, like, I don't know, squarish shape with a triangle coming out of it. And I thought that was just fun and nice to see that idea of because the light is often described as liquid that can fill a container without becoming the container. It just fills the shape of it, but it keeps its essence. And so I just thought that was nice. And Claudia, you have the cup here beside the treasure, jewelry, the temple complex, and then you have cup. And so that was just really nice to see. And John, you have the circles on their stems. Again, I think, and the sense of loneliness that Patrick also picked up on, I thought that was just interesting in the sense of, you know, these little lights of consciousness in this emptiness sometimes. You did a great job here, I think, John, of having the tetrahedron, the double pyramid shape with the hexagons around it in a circle, and that sense of wonder. And I think that's a really good match for this particular image of the sefirot that I used in my tasking and in my feedback. So I thought that was really good. And the idea that the area has been inhabited or established by intelligence and intention, that our reality, because that's what we're talking about here, the manifestation of reality, has been established by consciousness and intention. I just think that's so profound. Dutch Patrick brings up that idea of historical or other civilization. And Irish Patrick has this list where he's talking about something that's designed and coherent. It's vibrating and pulsing. There's a grid layered. There's intermittency in that grid layering. There's like a halo. There's orbs. There's frequency coming again. So again, I thought that was really good data from all of you. Does anyone want to add to anything?
Not yet.
Yeah, I'll say something about it. It did really seem like it was. I think I had desert or moon as a stray cat or AOL, because it was really barren in there, and it was like I was in my own little, like, almost on my own planet or area of region, I guess. And there's nobody else around, and it just kind of was. Now that I see the feedback, it's like probably just unique to everybody else in their own kind of life or journey.
That makes sense. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. And Michael's might be joining us. Sorry, I'm just trying to get the link to him while I do this as well. But yeah, I do. The loneliness of especially when you're meditating and you're trying to get into that space where I think there is that loneliness before you hit that point where you're with the light. Then all of a sudden, this I really thought was. I love the playful data. And so, John, I like that you're asking, why are you chanting? And they tell you, well, to gain approval, of course. I thought that was so good. For the ritual, that there's a ritual or process is needed to access this. And you do need some kind of a process. You meditate, or you get into your remote viewing state, or, people do different things. And that for this particular interpretation, the Kabbalists, that they do have the traditional robes and they have to chant, that they need the sacrament in order to access this. We don't put on robes. Most of us don't chant, but a lot of people listen to frequencies, theta frequencies or alpha frequencies. And so people do have processes and rituals to access the divine light or the information, the Akashic records, source, whatever you kind of want to call it. So I thought that was interesting. And so here's a little bit of information. People can pause the video if they're watching the replay. It's just the idea here that the Kabbalah sees the vessel, the human soul, as mirroring the divine. Oh, and that's the sound of Michael. Hello, Michael. I'm sorry that you had trouble joining us. But
yeah, not a problem. I'm sorry to good to be here. See everybody. I've been following along in the live stream. So.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah. And so yes. Okay. So the Kabbalah describes a vessel that receives the outward male light and then nurtures it and gives birth to the sefirot below. And it sees the human soul as mirroring the divine. And that's important for the data that's coming next. And there's also this idea that it describes the spiritual life of humans, of people, and breaking down their psychological processes to the underlying light. And so Dutch Patrick has a lot of information related to this, deeper understanding of nature, waves, excluded part of a bigger whole, that we are the excluded part. We're the small spark of the divine light, that we're currently excluded from it or separate from it. And then when you go into these processes, you rejoin with it. And so I thought that was a really nice interpretation of data from Patrick. He has this idea of sacred geometry, physical but vibrational, separating but kept in place. I think that's all very good data. And voices low hum, interaction is irregular. That matches. I think that fits, especially for the chanting of the peoples. And working towards an end point, that's the next step, this access to knowledge. That, I think, again, more just profound data in your sessions. And here's the mirroring. And so, Chris, you have this clashing, this strong energy. And Cody, you have the exact same shape as Chris, and it's curving, it's deep, again, energetic. So you're both picking up on the fact that there's something, a division, and you're mirroring it on both sides, and that it has to do with energy. And Jeff gives us the word mirror image, and he gives us the same kind of underlying motif, pattern of data. And then, Michael, you have it as a bridge or an overpass, but I see it as the same pattern. Chris, you had that there seems to be a strong energetic aspect to the target, that you perceive a collision, a lot of movement that can be chaotic, or it can become order out of chaos and randomness. And I thought that was, again, really, really, really beautiful. Yeah. Did you want to say something? Anyone on this data?
It's just, yeah, it's a good way of describing reality.
Yes. Yeah. I like that you guys picked up on that mirroring. And so here, this is Jeff, mostly your data. At some point, I started just clumping people's data per session because there was just so many slides. And so, Jeff, you had really strong data about the lights and the circular aspect, the emanations, searchlights, flashing lights, and also the frequency coming in as sirens, the idea of illumination, the flame of the sefirot. And then you even had that sense of the sacred geometry of it. it came through kind of as a baseball field, which is playful, but the underlying data is correct, right? It's that idea of you have these lights and they're in these different locations and there's a triangulation. So I thought that was actually really, really good. And then you have the idea of the container that contains the divine light and that it gets poured out in a controlled release. I thought that was really good. And Claudia, I think that there was this little sketch that you had in your session, and I actually thought that there was a resemblance there with Jeff's plumb line, which is the direction, right? Direct to source. This is more of Jeff's data. Jeff, you had the center in the center. I thought that was really good. And you can see here you have the sefirot, right? You have the peak and then the circles on the stems. And that idea of watching goes both ways. Again, that was really striking to me. And I think it has a lot of meaning when you think about it in relation to this in particular, that watching is going both ways. You're looking, but what's looking back? And the idea that it's larger than life, it's alive, it has a mind of its own, that you're interacting with something that has its own consciousness. Michael, you have this crystalline structure and gemstone brilliant and this kind of refraction of light, and that matched really well with Jeff's crystal structures at the top of the stem, this stammation or amplification of the energy. Just fantastic data. And here you have the Escher maze of stairways. And I think as well that kind of fits that circular pattern and that idea that you have to go through all the different points of the sefirot to get either up to the divine light or down to physical reality. So I just thought this was really good data. And again, you have these single units grouped into arrays. A lot of people picked up on that idea of you're part of a bigger whole, but you're separate from it. And so very, very good data. Claudia, you have a big eye that's watching, if spying, maybe controlling. You picked up on a negative feeling, and that ties in with the idea that a lot of people had the word dangerous in their session. And I'm not sure what to make of that, but I think it's very interesting. You even had the idea of an observation camera, and Patrick picked up on this idea of like a camera flashing lights. And Michael, you had this display screen that I interpreted as a camera, but the idea of watching did come through in multiple people's data. And then Claudia, here you had finding the secret elements that are most important. The house feels safe. The surroundings feel good. So that's positive, at least. I think that's good. The idea of a phoenix rising from the fire. And we talked earlier about the sefirot being described as a flame. So I thought that was good data. Old knowledge on how to do something, maybe a recipe of a healing liquid has been found again, and the light can heal, right? And so that idea of the healing liquid, I think that matches really well. A lot of people had this as something cloudy with energetics kind of nearby, waves, and I think that fits in with that idea of atoms. And Cody, you mentioned that idea of like looking microscopically, there's something there, but you can't really see it. And I think that this idea of probabilities of reality, the quantum space, the randomness, the order, the collapse of the probabilities, I just thought that was interesting data. And then we get to this. And so this, Cody, so because David and I have been playing with the Ganzfeld, testing the Ganzfeld, and for David it works exceptionally well. And I was telling the people in the live stream before we started, for me it makes me very, very nauseated. It just makes me throw up, so it's not super ideal. So I wouldn't recommend people force themselves to do the Ganzfeld if you start feeling nausea, because sometimes you can't just push through it. But for David, he's had amazing results with the Ganzfeld flicker. And I know that there's a black and white documentary that was made, scientists that went and they tried out magic mushrooms before magic mushrooms really hit the US. And they were reporting on it, and they were amazed, and they were having psychic experiences. And one of them started using the Ganzfeld flicker and found that he was able to get really accurate data and psychic impressions by using the Ganzfeld flicker. And that's just when you're flashing lights. Not enough to cause seizures, but Cody, you were picking up on seizures. And so I think it's interesting. Did you want to talk a little bit about this here?
Yeah, I felt, it was related to that other thing, but I felt this was like, yeah, man-made, and it was used to. I kind of felt like torture to me. I didn't like it, but it definitely changed your brain waves and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I just kept thinking that it was like an experimental thing, and it just, yeah, it was like being in a nightclub with the strobe lights just going boom boom. And it was, yeah.
And I think it's go ahead, Claudia.
Oh, sorry, I'm not mute. No, what is it called? Stratoscope or in a discotheque?
Strobe.
Yeah.
Yes. But I think, this is something people could take as a warning, is that a lot of the things that we do to improve our remote viewing, some of these things can be dangerous. If you're strapping magnets to your head, make sure you know what you're doing. Make sure you know what the long-term consequences of that are. Make sure you know what the effects of that are, and how is it affecting the neurotransmitters that are being released. And, the brain is so plastic that if you take something that increases your serotonin levels, your brain starts killing off serotonin receptors. That's why when people do E, they typically report being super depressed the next day, because the E just floods your brain with happy chemicals, and your brain says this isn't normal, and it starts destroying all the receptors for those happy chemicals. And then the next day, you have no artificial happy chemicals. All you have are the ones your brain is producing, but there's no receptor sites for them. And so you can't experience the happiness, and so you go through depression. And so a lot of these things, the brain is always trying to maintain an equilibrium. And so that's why I think as well, with even some of the meditation and some of that, I think it helps to go at it in a gradual way so that your brain normalizes. Oh, we're doing this weird thing now. Okay, let's go with that. Instead of just going from 0 to 60, kind of just step up. And I think for the Ganzfeld flicker, yes, people get amazing results with it, but you're not going to get amazing results if you're having a seizure, if you're throwing up, or whatever it is, right? Or if it feels like torture. And so I think it's about taking your time with it, being careful with it, testing it out, making sure you're not harming yourself in any way. So I think that's the warning that I think is a valid warning to take from the data. John had using an energy wave to recreate or provide reinforcement to an area of focus. And that's exactly what successfully using the Ganzfeld flicker does seem to do for people that it does work for. And yeah, again, Cody, you really picked up on the underlying nature of the target, that it has something to do with the mind or brain activity, and it does. And you brought up the double slit experiment, and Patrick is talking about bending reality using light. And Claudia had talked about healing with this light, the liquid light. So I think that there's a lot of really good data here. I wanted to just say a quick thing about this data point you had, Cody, where you say you feel like there's things bouncing around, like shaking a can with marbles inside, and you have the light, this motion energy. So David has done the boost on a couple people, and I'm one of the people he tried testing it on. And it feels like my soul is bouncing around in my body. And I wouldn't have used the word soul, I think, before I had that experience. But after having that experience, I really felt like there was my energetic component bouncing around in my body until it just wants to jump out so I can have a bilocation event. And so when I saw that in your data, I just thought it was funny, because you're describing very much the experiences that I've had in these kind of experiments of remote viewing. And so I just thought that was such a nice description of something that I've had. So I like to see that. Jeff, I liked your data. The watching goes both ways. I thought that was really intriguing in terms of, yeah, and just in terms of the dialogue or being observed by what it is you're observing. And then Dutch Patrick had attracted by an outside force, and just a lot of, you had the Stargate, that idea that you get pulled in, you get drawn into it. And I think that that's accurate for certain levels of consciousness. And then here we have representations of reality, the probability wave. And so John has the cycle runs on like an idle-like pattern. It's like a heartbeat. And Jeff, you have the staircase. Claudia and Jeff both describe a stone staircase. And so I thought that was really nice. And both talked about ancient runes. And so I thought that was very, very nice little correlation there. And then Patrick here, he has these triangles that are interconnected. And that idea of manifesting in frequencies at different places, at different places. And I thought that was, again, a really good description of our reality and how it manifests. And so very, very good. Bending reality, all these little people going through, spectators going through the doorway to something else. And Jeff, you had these separate, things are separate when the holes get large enough. So again, that idea of separation from the light, or having the divine spark within you, but it's a separate from the light you're rejoining with. And John had these paper thin layers, and Patrick as well picked up on this pattern of graduated layers. So there's something there that I think is interesting. And then, so here we get to some of the really, I suspect that there are military experiments that were done, have been done, maybe are being done with some of these things that we're talking about in terms of the Ganzfeld flicker, only because Cody, you know, you're talking about this person that is scared to do this, his third eye being open against his will, that it feels like torture. Claudia has tragic and horrifying energy of an asylum. The idea of Freud comes up. And again, so a researcher of psychology, a researcher of consciousness, there's something more tragic than meets the eye. And in the same way, Cody, that you have that he's being forced to do this, Claudia's picking up here, you're picking up, Claudia, the person is not voluntarily there, that they're being tested upon, and that more people are involved. And the purpose is to find the secrets of the mind. So I think you guys are picking up on research that I don't really know who's doing this research, where it's being done, but it sounds quite horrific. You're picking up on psychological research, and you know, Cody, that matches your data here, where you're saying it feels like it's an experiment, mind altering in some way. And there's a circular ring-shaped object that has an internal energy. That's the sefirot. And they're using this bright blue flashing light. And to me, that looks like experiments on the Ganzfeld flicker to see maybe what they could do with it. And you know, Irish Patrick brings up this big box of light that to me seems similar to what you've drawn here, Cody. So there's that corroboration, and he's seeing this camera flashing light. And so again, I think you're describing something real, and it's curious. Michael, I don't know if I had said this before you joined or not, but the idea of surrounded by trees, we had seen that the sefirot is the tree of life, is one of the names it's given and one of the representations. And that idea that you have the tree of life, the sefirot surrounding you at the site of technical research that's involving light or sound. So I think that there's something here. A lot of people had this idea of scientific research. It's curious. I don't quite know what to make of it. And then here again, for more corroboration that there's something underlying reality to this data. So Cody, you draw this man seated being forced to look at this flashing light that feels torturous to him. And you have this other man watching in control, and he's carrying a paper or a book or something. And then in Dutch Patrick's session, he has the exact same thing. He has this observer, male, carrying a book of some kind. And then here's the seated subject. And they're leaning a bit forward. He has this idea of a scientific kind of feel, an authority figure, and that there's a voice of someone telling about some kind of an experiment. Chris is picking up on science, research, physics of energy, and Claudia is picking up on the investigation of the mind. So everyone's picking up on something really weird here, and I'm quite curious. You're not picking up on military, though, so I think that this is something different from that. And then here again, Claudia, I think this data matches what Cody was describing. This person has test stickers on their head. They're being tested. And then you also bring up the idea of the bell having a low frequency that heals people. And Michael also has this golden bell. And Claudia here, I would say I would look at this maybe from an analysis interpretation. I could maybe see this as the Akashic records. You have all these books, and this red carpet and these antique things here and just that little portal. And in relation to what you're talking about, I think it actually matches with that concept of trying to access the Akashic records, the divine light that has all the information. And then here's something interesting with the testing. So Jeff, you have that idea of like, these people are pawns. They're just chess pieces being moved around against their will. You have animal experiments, a horse or a dog maybe. Claudia has experiments on animals as well, animals like cats and experiments. And this I thought was interesting in terms of what I had said earlier about the AI. Claudia's talking about dead animals, testing on dead animals related to this. And Claudia talked about the 9 lives, right? So are they bringing back dead animals to see if they can bring back humans? Because I know there is research being done on that right now about can you bring back dead people and how long after they die can you revive them? And what does that mean for consciousness? And so, you know, for Cody, you actually wrote down, feels like testing on animals, unwilling participants, and Claudia picked up on that as well. And Patrick as well had this kind of prison, aluminum cell with windows, and you have this chimp, this monkey, and this monkey man, I actually think that that's a human from the perspective of certain people that are testing on humans, and they just see them as monkeys, and they don't care that they're testing on humans. So I actually thought that that's what you're pointing at with that, to be honest, just because of the context. And then here, Jeff as well has the test center with the cemetery. And here's the sefirot, the divine light on its stem. And it's being measured and it's being triangulated. There's a surveyor trying to figure out where is it? How do we access it? And Claudia has the data that they're somehow using this light as decoration in tombs. You see a professor bringing an animal back to life, like Stephen King's Pet Cemetery. And that there's the cemetery there in Jeff's session related to the test center. So I do think that this is maybe pointing to, to testing on bringing animals back. So yeah, I don't approve. And then Claudia, you had the idea of maybe blood or DNA being involved. And I think that there is research in that as well. And then the peacock is a symbol of rebirth and renewal. It's also an ancient symbol for reincarnation, especially for the secret societies. They use the peacock for reincarnation. And so you have the peacock right under the idea of blood and DNA, and the peacock protecting a building. So I think protecting the body. And you have this idea of DNA. And so I know that there are some theories that talk about your consciousness somehow being linked with your genetics. So if I take your consciousness out of your body to put it in a container, to put it in someone else, that somehow your genetic code, your consciousness knows your genetic code and it knows your body. So I think there are interesting kind of side avenues to kind of look into for that. I wasn't sure. So Dutch Patrick here, when he has his person doing the test on the other person, the observer, and Jeff is talking about the watching going both ways and security and puzzles, riddles, solving problems. And there's a comment here by Patrick saying a scientific kind of feel of a respected authority. And he mentioned the word Erasmus. And so I looked up Erasmus because I had heard of Erasmus programs in European universities, but I wasn't familiar with the person. And so it's someone he was a Catholic priest developing humanist techniques for working on text. He prepared pioneering Latin and Greek editions of the New Testament, the Bible. And so he's kind of really writing about free will, the praise of folly, Christianity, civility in children, basically how to be a moral person within Christianity. And so I thought that was interesting. And so I'll leave it at that for people who want to do kind of further research. Jeff, you have this idea of it being passed down generation to generation. And then John comes in with the mitochondria, that the mitochondria is a main organizer that's affected by this process. And it's interesting for healing because they do talk about the light activating your little mitochondria. if you take methylene blue, you would know about the relationship between the blue light and the mitochondria. So it's interesting that he's talking about them and the shift and change in matter. And reptile-like similarities are present within the genetic structure of these bioorganisms. So that's interesting. I just thought that was an interesting data point there. And so, so what are your thoughts on that data?
That's crazy.
I agree.
Yeah, it's very special that we all had the same things, because I thought I was far off the target, and then we all ended up with a lot of similar things. Because when I looked up the peacock, I came on a site which mentioned Telemapedia. So this was the way the sefirot was underdivided. It had to do with planets and with the zodiac, and therefore I thought the tiger and the peacock.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah,
it makes sense how you explain it.
well, I think when you start getting complex conceptual data, what I found is you get multi-layers of meaning. The data stream will give you information that has multiple layers of interpretation, of meaning. You can take it in different ways, and they're all valid, and they all lead to even more data. And I find that that's when I know my session that I was really in deep, is when I'm getting data that tells two different levels, I guess, of the story. And so I think that that's a good thing when your data does do that. Other thoughts on this, Jeff? What did you think?
So big picture, the last few sessions, I'll just express that it's becoming more clear that we're working as a team and we're really supporting each other's data, and that feels good.
Yes.
Thanks for putting this all together, and thank you all for doing the work that you do.
Yeah, thank you everyone for taking it seriously. You all, you put effort into your work, I can tell, and you put time into it, and you give me so much data. And when I'm, 8 hours into my slide presentation, sometimes I wonder if I want all that data, but it's worth it because it's amazing to see, and it unlocks so much data. So yeah, I agree with Jeff. I think, you're doing great work and at a really great level. And so I think it's really good. And you're definitely working as a cohesive team. That's nice to see. So I hope that's fun for all of you. Michael, I know you missed kind of the first bit, but if you want to say anything about that as well, this would be the time.
Yeah, that was with the Japanese underwater object. Yeah, I was pretty happy with a few data points they came up with, just related to the woman with the lion. I think that came from I had this image in my mind of the tarot card for strength, and there was just like the woman there.
Okay.
So I just got the image of like soft power. Basically, it's sort of contrasted with like the chariot, which is more like direct war, and this one's more about influence and diplomacy and so on. So it made me think a bit more about like if there was like a political dimension to it, like definitely maybe this one was like part of a bargaining chip for that.
That makes sense. Yeah, very good. Yeah, definitely. And Chris?
I have to say I like the first target more. I thought it was cooler. Just because the second target, it's much more difficult to get verifiable data. But I still find it amazing that everybody had like crazy energetics and light coming in. It's amazing that there are always correlations between sessions on the big points.
Yes. Yeah. I found, and for the sketches as well as the sentences, the words, the word choice, the data, I really found that the mirroring is working on every level. So that's kind of nice. Encoding? What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Chris. I like the first one better.
Yeah.
It was, that second target kind of took a bit of a turn for me in the retasking, but yeah, it was pretty cool. It's good to see everyone get the same stuff.
I like to mix things up a bit. Honestly, I have to admit, I also wasn't as fond of the second target, but I thought it was worth doing, and I thought it was worth exploring. And even as an example for people to say, instead of asking people remote view God or remote view source, remote view the Akashic records, I thought this is just a different way of approaching that data. And I think we saw that, we did get data about that in different ways. And it's just about figuring out with your tasking, what information are you investigating, exploring, and how do you do it in a way that you don't end up with stuff that's, I don't know, either too cliche or everyone draws an old man with a beard on a throne, or I don't know, right? So I think that was kind of the idea of that one, is just trying to explore how do you get around some of the blocks or some of the challenges in remote viewing. The utsuro-bune, to be honest, when I tasked it, I wasn't super excited about it. I was like, this is a good one to task though, because I do think that there's more of a historical story that doesn't have to do with UFOs, but I didn't realize how much. And so I was interested in tasking that one to show that, yeah, you can get some UFO data without it having to be a UFO. And I think we did an amazing job. I think you guys did an amazing job of coming up with the data for the Ainu people. And Claudia, what did you think overall?
You're muted.
It was again a very interesting evening, and going through everything. Yeah, and this symbiosis, it's very nice. I love it. Yeah. Thank you for everything what you do.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for participating. So the next one we're going to do, I'm going to put the target out probably next week. And then we'll only have one target for October. We will have retasks, but just one target, because 2 is too much for me. And it makes the live streams really long as well, and it's really late for people, or it's really early for people. It's just hard to make it work. And so we'll do one, and I'll try to find a target that everyone likes a little bit more this week. But I think the data was still awesome and fun, and so it's hard to find targets. I want to find things that people are interested in. I don't want to go too cliche, and so I want to take into account, I'm trying to pick safe targets for people, and I'm trying to take your personalities into account a little bit, what I do know of them. And so we'll see what I come up with for next month. But I want to thank everyone for their work, and thank you to the remote viewers who were not here today. You were missed. And John Dixon, who was here briefly, but then then he got home and he had his little ones to play with. So he had great data though, and yeah, the people who weren't here also had great data, so it was good. Any parting comments before we go?
Maybe just that the sketches of John are really good. I'd like to get some drawing classes from him.
Yes. Yeah, because I'm in the same boat with David. He's an artist. He draws incredibly, and I have my little stickmen. And I've been working really hard over the last 2 years to transition away from stickmen into proper sketches. And it's worth it because it does make a difference in the session. I watch YouTube videos. I try to at least once a week put an hour in of like YouTube videos on how to draw dimensions, how to draw hands, how to draw faces, how to draw perspective. And so I think most remote viewers probably would benefit from just improving their drawing a little bit even. Because that can help. And just in terms of presentation style, it does look nice. So yeah, I think Naeem he taught a course this summer on the importance of artistry and drawing for remote viewing. And so maybe he'll teach that again. Yeah, but I agree. But, you know, at the end of the day, though, Chris, your data, even though I will admit, like myself, our sketches are not on the level of John's. I think though that your conceptual data, your meaning data, and you're still communicating the pattern of information, because you saw today how many of your sketches were corroborated, were matched and mirrored with other people's sketches, and so it's not holding you back in any way. So yeah, I think for presentation, yeah, we could always improve sketching, I think, a little bit, but I think you're still getting the data there. So good job on that. So yeah, so thank you everyone, and I hope you have a good evening, morning, night, day, wherever you are in the world right now. And I will see you again soon.
Thanks.
Thanks to you.
And thank you to everyone in chat. We appreciated your participation. Bye.